Listen closely. I'll tell you about the widow spiders of Thessaly. Those ancient creatures who understood something we've forgotten. They don't kill their mates out of cruelty. No, that's a child's interpretation. They consume them because they recognize what we refuse to admit. That love, at its purest, is an act of sacred destruction. Picture this. A man sits in his apartment at 3 a.m., scrolling through her Instagram. She's in Mykonos now, laughing with friends, golden-skinned and radiant. 3 months ago, she was crying in his arms, swearing she'd never leave. The apartment still smells like her vanilla perfume. That synthetic sweetness that clings to the curtains, like a ghost refusing exorcism. He's searching for signs of suffering in her photos. Some evidence that she carries the weight of their ending. But there's nothing. Just that practiced smile, those carefully curated moments of joy. What he doesn't understand, what Schopenhauer tried to warn us about in his musty Berlin study, is that female betrayal isn't betrayal at all. It's architecture. Women build escape routes into relationships the way medieval castles built secret passages. Not out of malice, but out of an ancient wisdom encoded in their DNA. A survival instinct older than language itself. I once knew a fisherman in Santorini who told me about the octopus. They grow back their arms, he said, cigarette dangling from weathered lips. Cut one off, another appears. But the arm that's cut, it keeps moving, keeps grasping, doesn't know it's already dead. He wasn't talking about octopi. The paradox is this. The very quality that makes women seem treacherous, their ability to detach, to move forward without looking back, is the same quality that makes them survivors. While men write poetry about their wounds, women are already 3 chapters into their next story. A 2024 study from the Institute of Behavioral Psychology found that women recover from breakups 23% faster than men. Not because they loved less, but because they loved differently. They loved with exit strategies. Have you ever watched a house burn from the inside? The flames are beautiful at first, almost hypnotic. The wallpaper curls like dying flowers. The photographs bubble and blacken. And there's this moment, this terrible, gorgeous moment, where you realize the destruction has its own intelligence. That's what it feels like when she stops loving you. Not all at once, but room by room, memory by memory, until you're standing in the ashes, wondering when the first match was lit. The Machiavellian truth nobody whispers. Betrayal is a teaching. Every woman who leaves takes with her a piece of your blindness. She reveals through her absence the parts of yourself you refuse to see. The narcissism disguised as romance. The possession masquerading as protection. The way you loved her like a museum loves its artifacts, desperately, uselessly, behind glass. There's an old Romanian folktale about a man who captured a vila, a forest spirit who looked like a woman made of morning mist. He bound her with chains of silver and promises of eternal devotion. Every night she danced for him, and every night she grew more solid, more human, more his. Until one morning he woke to find only the chains remained, twisted into the shape of a smile. The locals say you can still hear him calling her name in the mountains, but the mountains only echo back his own voice, distorted and strange. Tell me something, and be honest. When was the last time you looked at a woman without calculating what she could give you? Her beauty, her comfort, her validation, her womb, her admiration, her cooking, her silence, her noise. We've turned love into a transaction and then act surprised when women learn to be better accountants. The liberation comes not from understanding women, but from understanding the poverty of our own need. When you stop seeing betrayal as something done to you and start seeing it as something revealed about you, the whole game changes. Suddenly, her leaving becomes a gift. The gift of finally seeing yourself without the funhouse mirror of her validation. But here's the cruelest joke. By the time you understand this, by the time you've metabolized the lesson and emerged somehow cleaner, somehow more whole, she's beyond caring. She's in someone else's bed, creating new futures you'll never be part of. And the knowledge that you finally got it means absolutely nothing to her. Your enlightenment is just another story she doesn't need to hear. The candle on my desk has burned down to a nub while I've written this. The wax has pooled and hardened into shapes that look almost like faces if you squint. That's what we're left with, isn't it? These hardened puddles of what once burned bright. These abstract impressions of heat that once was. So here's my question for you, dear listener. And I want you to sit with it like you'd sit with a loaded gun. What if the woman who destroyed you was actually trying to save you? What if every betrayal was just a birth you were too frightened to recognize? Solitude is not the absence of others, but the presence of self. Shh. Can you hear that? That's the sound of a man discovering he actually likes his own company. Terrifying, isn't it? There's a cathedral in Prague, St. Vitus, if you must know, where the stained glass throws colors onto stone that hasn't seen sunlight in 600 years. I stood there once, completely alone, at that liminal hour when tourists have fled and priests haven't yet arrived. The silence was so complete I could hear my own blood moving through my veins, that subtle whoosh whoosh that reminds you that you're just a bag of meat pretending to have a soul. And I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a crazy laugh, but the laugh of someone who finally gets the joke. The joke is this. We've spent so long running from ourselves that we've forgotten we're the only company we're guaranteed to keep. Kierkegaard called it the sickness unto death. This desperate need to be witnessed, to be validated, to exist in the eyes of another. But what he didn't mention, perhaps because he was too busy seducing and abandoning Regine Olsen, was that this sickness has a cure. It's called radical aloneness. Not loneliness. That's just solitude polluted by need. I'm talking about the kind of aloneness that medieval mystics sought in their caves, that Thoreau fumbled toward at Walden before his mother brought him sandwiches. I'll paint you a picture. It's 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. You're sitting in your kitchen, drinking wine that's slightly too warm, reading a book you've been meaning to finish for 3 years. There's no one to impress with your literary choices, no one to perform your sophistication for. And suddenly, you realize you're not actually interested in Proust. You close the book, put on that guilty pleasure playlist, yes, the one with the boy band songs, and dance alone in your boxers while eating cereal straight from the box. This is the first cathedral, the church of finally being yourself without apology. But here's where it gets strange, where it gets delicious. A 2025 study from Copenhagen, those Danes know their melancholy, found that men who spent 6 months in intentional solitude showed increased activity in the same brain regions associated with spiritual experience. Not meditation, not prayer, just the raw act of being alone with their thoughts. They literally rewired their neural pathways through the simple act of not fleeing themselves. The ancient Stoics had a practice called negative visualization, imagining loss to appreciate presence. But we've bastardized it. We imagine losing others to appreciate them, when we should be imagining losing ourselves to finally find who we are. Every moment you spend in someone else's gaze is a moment you're not spending in your own depths. There's a man I know, let's call him Marcus, because all sad philosophers should be named Marcus, who discovered his wife's affair through a grocery receipt. Condoms hidden between organic kale and oat milk, like some sort of modern tragedy written by a bored suburban god. For 6 months after she left, he didn't speak to anyone beyond the necessary pleasantries. Not out of depression, but out of curiosity. He wanted to know who he was when no one was watching. You know what he discovered? He hated craft beer. 15 years of pretending to appreciate IPAs because she was into the brewery scene. He actually preferred cheap whiskey and silence. He discovered he could spend entire Sundays building model trains, not because he cared about trains, but because the methodical work quieted something primal in his brain. He learned he was funnier when no one was around to laugh, kinder when no one was there to witness his kindness. The Cathedral of One has strange acoustics. Your thoughts echo back differently when there's no one else's noise to muddle them. You start to hear the hymns you've been singing off-key your whole life, the prayers you've been mispronouncing to fit someone else's God. But I should warn you, and this is crucial, solitude is not a cure for needing others. It's more like chemotherapy for the soul. It kills the diseased parts of your need, but it might take some healthy tissue with it. You'll emerge from your hermitage changed, possibly unrecognizable. The friends who loved your performance won't recognize the actor without his mask. The women who desired your desperate energy won't know what to do with your completion. Here's what Nietzsche understood in his final days, syphilitic and mad, hugging a horse in Turin. The Übermensch isn't someone who transcends humanity, but someone who finally becomes human without audience. The horse didn't judge him. The horse didn't need him to be profound. And in that moment of absolute ridiculousness, he touched something eternal. So I ask you, no, I dare you. Can you spend 1 week without explaining yourself to anyone? Without narrating your life? Without seeking validation? Without the drug of another's gaze? Can you sit in your own cathedral and listen to what echoes back? Most can't. Most won't. Most will read this and immediately text someone about the crazy article they just encountered, seeking connection through the very act of discussing disconnection. But you might be different. You have that look about you, the look of someone who's tired of his own performance. Welcome to the cathedral. The service is about to begin, and you're both priest and congregation. Every woman you've loved still haunts your bed, and they're all laughing. Have you ever noticed how memory has teeth? I woke up this morning to the smell of jasmine, her perfume, the one she wore that summer in Barcelona when we pretended we could make it work. Except there's no jasmine here, just my brain, that carnival of horrors, conjuring phantoms from 3 years ago because I made the mistake of sleeping on the left side of the bed, her side. Even my pillows remember the weight of betrayal. Let me tell you a secret that will either liberate or destroy you. Every woman you've ever loved is still with you. Not metaphorically, literally. They live in your muscle memory, in the way you fold towels, Marie taught you that. In the way you cook eggs, Sandra couldn't stand them runny. In the songs you skip because Ashley played them during the breakup. You're not one man. You're a committee of every version of yourself each woman created and abandoned. The Japanese have a word, tsukumogami, for objects that acquire souls after existing for 100 years. But they're wrong about the timeline. Your bed became haunted the first night she slept in it. Your car's passenger seat developed consciousness the moment she adjusted the mirror. These ghosts don't wait a century. They move in immediately, set up shop in the mundane corners of your life, and proceed to mock your attempts at moving forward. Here's a modern parable for you. A man downloads a dating app. Let's call it Tinder, because we're not here to be subtle. He swipes through faces like a slot machine player convinced the next pull will pay out. But something strange happens. Every third woman looks like Rebecca. Every laugh and every voice note sounds like Chenwei's. Every "Hey stranger" text carries the cadence of that girl from university whose name he's forgotten, but whose dismissal still stings 20 years later. A neuroscientist in Stockholm, it's always the Scandinavians uncovering our darkness, published a paper in 2024 showing that romantic memory creates actual physical pathways in the brain, grooves like a vinyl record. Every time you remember her, you deepen the groove. Every time you try to forget, you play the record. We're all just broken jukeboxes, playing the same sad songs on repeat. But here's where it gets exquisitely cruel. These ghosts don't haunt you with sadness. They haunt you with joy. It's 11:47 p.m. You're brushing your teeth, and suddenly you remember that Tuesday afternoon when she laughed so hard at your terrible joke that wine came out her nose. The memory is so vivid you can taste the cheap Malbec, feel the sunshine through your apartment window, hear the neighbors arguing through thin walls. And for just a moment, one crystalline, perfect moment, you're happy. Then you remember she's married now, to a dentist in Portland. Schopenhauer wrote that we can never be happy in the present, only in retrospect or anticipation. But he didn't go far enough. We're not just unable to be happy in the present, we're actively tortured by the happiness of the past. Every ghost in your bed is a testament to joy that died. And they whisper their stories while you try to sleep. I knew a bartender in Athens who kept a jar of wedding rings behind the bar. Men leave them here, he said, thinking they're leaving the past. But watch. He shook the jar, and the rings sang against the glass like wind chimes. You can hear them calling their owners back. Brusen, the Feast of Ghosts isn't about them, though. That's the magic trick, the misdirection. While you're busy cataloging their betrayals, measuring their absences, the real feast is happening. They're consuming your present. Every moment you spend comparing your current lover to the ghost of the last is a moment you're not actually living. You're a curator in a museum of dead relationships, polishing exhibits no one comes to see. There's a solution, but you won't like it. The philosophers call it amor fati, love of fate. The acceptance not just of what is, but of what was. Every ghost in your bed was once a teacher. Rebecca taught you that love isn't possession. Chenwei showed you that leaving can be an act of kindness. That nameless girl from university? She introduced you to the exquisite pain of wanting what doesn't want you back. The first lesson in being human. A man in Tokyo spent 3 years sleeping in a sleeping bag on his bedroom floor because his ex-wife's ghost owned the bed. One night, driven by sake and exhaustion, he climbed back into the haunted sheets. He expected torment. Instead, he found nothing. The ghosts had starved. Fed by his avoidance, they'd grown fat on his fear. Faced with his presence, they dissipated like morning mist. He slept for 14 hours and woke up alone, beautifully, terrifyingly alone. So here's my question, whispered like a ghost in your ear. What if you invited them all to dinner? Every woman who left, who lied, who loved you badly or too well. What if you set them each a place at your table and said, "Thank you for the lesson. Now get the fuck out of my house." Because that's the secret the ghosts don't want you to know. They only have the power you feed them. And you've been serving a banquet to the dead while you starve in your own home. Your destruction was always the point. Some flowers only bloom in ash. Let me tell you about the most beautiful thing I ever saw. It was a man, 43 years old, standing in the rain outside a courthouse, laughing. Not the bitter laugh of irony, not the broken laugh of madness, but the pure, crystalline laugh of someone who finally understands the joke. His wife had just taken everything: house, kids, savings, even the dog he'd rescued from a kill shelter. The rain had soaked through his last good suit, the one he'd worn to court like armor that failed. And he laughed like a child discovering bubbles for the first time. "I'm free," he told me, water streaming down his face like the tears he wouldn't cry. "I'm finally fucking free." We've been sold a lie more poisonous than any snake oil. That destruction is failure. That when a woman leaves you in ruins, you've lost. But what if... Stay with me here. What if destruction is the only way some men ever learn to build? Consider the phoenix. Not the Disney version, all pretty flames and triumphant music, but the real myth. The bird doesn't choose to burn. It's compelled by nature, by some internal timer that says, now you must become ash. And in that becoming, in that total annihilation of what was, lies the only pathway to what could be. A psychologist in Berlin, of course it's Berlin, where else would someone study ruin so intimately, discovered something remarkable in 2023. Men who experienced what she termed catastrophic romantic failure, the kind that leaves you Googling how to disappear completely at 4 a.m., showed marked increases in creativity, empathy, and what she called existential courage within 18 months. Not despite their destruction, but because of it. You want to know the truth about Machiavelli? The real lesson he never wrote because it would have been too dangerous? Power isn't about controlling others. Power is about surviving your own demolition and realizing you're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing what rises from the ashes. I have a friend, had a friend, destruction changes pronouns, who built his entire identity around being a husband. Provider, protector, the whole masculine mythology wrapped in a mortgage and matching towels. When she left, Tuesday 3:17 p.m., via text message while he was in a meeting, he didn't just lose a wife. He lost his entire cosmology. The sun no longer had a center to orbit. For 6 months, he was rubble. Drinking whiskey for breakfast, calling in sick to a job that was the only structure left in his life, sleeping in his car because the house smelled like the family that no longer existed. Rock bottom, we call it. But that's too poetic. It was more like quicksand. The harder he fought to maintain who he'd been, the faster he sank. Then one morning, it's always a morning, isn't it? He woke up in that car, looked at himself in the rearview mirror, and saw a stranger. Not the husband, not the provider, not the protector. Just a man, stripped of every story he'd been telling himself. And instead of horror, he felt curious. Who was this stranger? What did he want? What could he become without the weight of who he'd been? The ancient alchemists believed in solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. Break down the base metal until nothing remains but prime matter, then rebuild it as gold. They were talking about consciousness, not chemistry. Sometimes a man needs to be dissolved completely before he can discover what he's really made of. But here's the cruel grace of it. The women who destroy us rarely stick around to see what we become. They're catalysts, not witnesses. They light the match and leave before the phoenix rises. That bartender you're going to become? She'll never taste your cocktails. That novel you'll write in the clarity of solitude? She'll never read the dedication she inspired, but doesn't deserve. That version of you that learns to love without possession, to give without keeping score. She'll never meet him. And that's the point. That's the gift wrapped in the grave. Your destruction was never about her. She was just the match. You were always the kindling, waiting for someone to show you how to burn. There's a forest in Colorado where they do controlled burns. Every few years, they deliberately set fire to sections of undergrowth. Tourists think it's destruction, but the rangers know better. Some seeds only germinate in extreme heat. Some trees only release their progeny when faced with flames. The forest isn't being destroyed. It's being reminded how to grow. So let me ask you something, and I want you to feel this in your bones. What if every woman who broke you was just preparing the soil? What if every betrayal was just clearing ground for something you couldn't grow while you were still intact? What if your ruin isn't the end of your story, but the compost from which your real life begins? Stop trying to rebuild who you were. That man is dead, and thank God for it. He was probably boring anyway, all compromise and quiet desperation. The man you're becoming, the one forged in failure, birthed from betrayal, he's going to be magnificent, or he's going to be nothing. That's the gamble of ruin. Not everyone rises. Some men just stay ash, bitter and scattered, telling anyone who'll listen about the fire that consumed them. The alchemy only works if you choose transformation over restoration. You can't go back to base metal once you've been dissolved. You either become gold or remain nothing. Choose wisely. The flames are already lit. When you stop feeding the hunger, you discover you were never starving. There's a monastery in the mountains of Macedonia where the monks haven't spoken in 40 years. Not out of devotion, but out of exhaustion. They simply ran out of things to say about God, about meaning, about the point of it all. Now they communicate in gestures and glances, and visitors say they seem happier than any talking holy men they've met. Sometimes silence is the only honest sermon left. I'm going to tell you something that will sound like heresy to every dating coach, pickup artist, and relationship guru selling their snake oil on social media. The moment you stop wanting women is the moment you become a man. Not gay, not asexual, not broken, just free from the tyranny of appetite that's been running your life since puberty dropped its bomb in your bloodstream. Picture this. You're at a bar. It's always a bar in these stories, isn't it? And she walks in. Red dress, black heels. That laugh that sounds like champagne bubbles breaking. 5 years ago, you would have been calculating approaches, rehearsing lines, adjusting your posture to seem taller, richer, more mysterious. But tonight you just notice. The way you'd notice a sunset or a well-played violin. Beautiful, certainly. Moving, perhaps. But not necessary. Not the oxygen you've been drowning trying to breathe. The Buddhists have this concept. Tanha, the thirst that causes all suffering. But they were too gentle with the metaphor. It's not thirst. It's addiction. And we're all junkies, mainlining validation through the needle of female attention, convincing ourselves it's love when it's really just dopamine dressed up in lingerie. A neuroscientist in Tokyo, yes, another study, because even our emptiness needs empirical validation, mapped the brain activity of men during what they called romantic obsession. You know what it looked identical to? Cocaine addiction. The same neural pathways, the same desperation, the same inevitable crash when the supply runs out. We've literally been getting high on women our entire lives and calling it romance. But here's the delicious paradox, the cosmic joke that makes angels laugh and devils weep. The moment you stop needing them, they appear everywhere. Like cats who only come to people who ignore them, women have an almost supernatural ability to sense when a man has transcended his hunger. And they find it unsettling. Attractive, yes, but deeply unsettling. Because what power does a goddess have over a man who no longer prays? I'll tell you a story that sounds like fiction, but isn't. There's a man in Prague a translator of dead languages, because of course he is, who decided at 38 to take what he called a sabbatical from desire. No dating, no flirting, no fantasizing. He wanted to know who he was without the constant background radiation of want. The first month was hell. Every woman on every street corner became a siren. Every casual interaction felt charged with loss. His body screamed betrayal. His mind conjured elaborate fantasies of dying alone, unloved, unmourned. But by the third month, something shifted. The noise quieted. The hunger, unfed, began to starve. By month 6, he reported something extraordinary. He could actually see women. Not as potential conquests or sources of validation or future disappointments, but as complete human beings with their own struggles, their own fears, their own boring Tuesday afternoons. The goddess mystique dissolved, and in its place stood people. Flawed, fascinating, ordinary people. Nietzsche wrote about the ascetic ideal, the rejection of earthly pleasures for spiritual gain. But he missed the point. Probably because he was too busy chasing Lou Salome around Europe like a philosophical puppy. The goal isn't to reject pleasure. It's to reject the slavery of needing pleasure. There's a difference between choosing to feast and needing to eat. One is freedom. The other is just metabolism with pretensions. The monastery of appetites isn't about celibacy. God, no. It's about something far more radical. Choosing from fullness rather than emptiness. When you stop trying to fill the void with women, you discover the void was never empty. It was full of you. Your thoughts, your creations, your purpose, screaming to be heard over the constant noise of desire. Here's what they won't tell you in men's magazines or therapy sessions. Every woman you've chased was a distraction from the man you were meant to become. Every hour spent strategizing seduction was an hour stolen from your own evolution. Every rejection that crushed you was the universe trying to redirect your attention back to yourself. And you were too drunk on desire to listen. But when you finally enter the monastery, when you finally stop feeding the hunger, something miraculous happens. You discover you were never starving. The hunger was the addiction, not the need. You can appreciate beauty without needing to possess it. Experience attraction without being enslaved by it. Even love without losing yourself in it. The monks in Macedonia have a saying, written, of course, never spoken. The man who needs nothing from God finally meets him. And replace God with women, and you have the secret that would collapse entire industries built on male desperation. So here's my final question. My parting gift wrapped in thorns. Are you brave enough to stop being hungry? Can you walk past the feast, knowing you could eat, but choosing not to? Until you remember what it feels like to be full? Can you become the monk of your own desires? Not through denial, but through the simple recognition that you already have everything you need? Most won't. Most can't. Most will read this and immediately open a dating app, seeking one more fix, one more hit, one more confirmation that they exist because she smiled. But you have that exhausted look of someone who's been hungry for so long, you've forgotten what satisfaction feels like. Maybe it's time to try fasting. Maybe it's time to discover that the monastery doors have been open all along, waiting for you to stop kneeling at the altar of appetite and start walking toward your own awakening. The bells are ringing. Can you hear them? They're calling you home to yourself.